Kongres Współpracy Transgranicznej Lublin 2022. Bezpieczeństwo i solidarność. Coroczne spotkanie praktyków współpracy transgranicznej z Unii Europejskiej i Partnerstwa Wschodniego. 3 dni paneli, spotkań i debat liderów samorządowych, organizacji pozarządowych i ekspertów z całej Europy. Forum partnerów. Giełda grantodawców. Wizyty studyjne, warsztaty, koncerty i spektakle. Na żywo i online. Lublin, 5-7 października 2022. Zarejestruj się bezpłatnie na stronie kongres.lublin.eu.
Dzień dobry, szanowni państwo. Dzisiaj
Hello and welcome everyone. I would like to invite you to this the panel between the victim and the heroine, the situation of women, Russian war in Ukraine. As we know, after Russia's assaulted the Ukrainian society faced huge challenges. The number of plenty of families had to evacuate, they had to flee the bombardments, the shellings. The families were decimated. They have suffered atrocities by the Russian the army. So today, with experts, we would like to have a discussion on the situation of women in Ukraine during wartime. The women
przeszły do takiego
that have been most affected, that have been forced to shift the roles. Part of the women, support the Ukrainian army. Some went for volunteering. Some take care of the logistics or simply evacuation of the women and children. Some of them have flown Ukraine together with their children. I can see the faces on the screen. We'll have experts. Tatyana Herasymova, now based in Krakow. She comes from Zaporozhye, used to live in Kiev. Agnieszka Lichnerowicz, TOK FM radio station. Magdalena Lachowicz, social scientist from the Mickiewicz University in Poznań. And this discussion will be moderated by Iwona, Reichardt, Deputy Editor-in-Chief, and Małgorzata Kopka-Piątek. The chief partner of the debate of this panel discussion is FemGlobal organization. It's a second edition of the panel. We inaugurated the sequence of meetings, the regular meetings last year, and the Polish-Ukrainian Dialogue Foundation is supporting us. Of course, there will be a Q&A session after the discussion. Thank you very much, Natalia. Let me say again, hello and welcome on the part of the moderators, Iwona, Reichardt, and myself. We are representing the FemGlobal women in global or international politics. Poland, we are really pleased that we are yet again present at the Congress. Women in international politics has been active in this regard for much longer. Today we want to discuss the situation of women in the context of war waged by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. And we have invited 3 experts to take part. I won't be introducing them again, but just a few words of explanation why these speakers, apart from the competence, knowledge, and interesting views, we want to present three different perspectives on women. As Tatyana Herasymova, a Ukrainian woman involved in the aid and the support initiatives that are necessary given the dramatic situation in Ukraine. Then the media, that's why Agnieszka Lichnerowicz is with us. Agnieszka has visited Ukraine on a number of occasions, also after the 24th of February, and she, has been sending us the news on the developments in Ukraine. She's been an expert on the women issues and also on the Ukraine. So we are interested in the media perspective on the topic. And Magdalena Lachowicz, as a representative of the academia, a researcher on the post-Soviet societies, just to complement the whole landscape, the picture of the women in Ukraine in those difficult times. So hello and welcome, all of you. We have prepared some questions to the speakers, so we'll be asking them one by one, and then we hope we will still have time to hold on a Q&A session. So, Iwona, Reichardt, please take the floor. Thank you. Hello and welcome on my part. Both those in Lublin and in person and online. I would like to thank the speakers for accepting the invitation. Let me start with some organizational matters. This discussion is due to be short, and the questions are not quite simple, not quite easy, and will take time to answer. Still, I would like to ask you, please take no longer than 5 minutes each in your responses, and we'll keep the time. So, just briefly on my side, as a kind of introduction, let me ask the first question, which is directly related to the title of the discussion. And we have spent some time, thinking what the title should be. I mean, we wanted to show something. We wanted to have some food for thought. So the question to you is, what's their role after the outbreak of the war, or the current stage of the war, this escalation of the armed conflict waged by Russia against Ukraine? What's their role of Ukrainian women? Are they heroines or perhaps victims of the war? When talking to the Ukrainian women, looking at Ukrainian women, what are the roles? Or perhaps there's something different. Tatyana, why don't you answer as the first one? You come from Ukraine, but you have studied, you have researched, Ukrainian women that fled Ukraine after the war broke out. Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation. As for the question, as for the roles, I don't like the word a victim. I may say that the Ukrainian women are not victims. Regardless of the fact that every one of us have lost someone. Or something, our homes, our family members, we have had to flee our cities, our past, our history, our lives, and so on. But regardless of that, I don't think that any of us is a victim.
Не дивлячись на те, чим займається кожна з нас, я думаю, що
whatever we do our everyday lives, I think that the war has forced us to find some new strength, internal strength in ourselves. The strength that keeps us going, keeps us fighting with what we are facing. Of course, among Ukrainian women, there are real heroines, fighting among the armed forces on the front line. There are also women that are volunteers, doing unbelievable things, getting medical supplies for the army, humanitarian aid, delivering these to spots that, no one else could reach. And, ordinary women who have fled to Poland, for instance, many of them, are heroines, really. So, now in Poland, as an international organization, we have visited the places where Ukrainian women and children stay. In March, when we spoke to them, I saw among them a lot of really strong women. They, hadn't known themselves, how strong they were, but they were able to make the decision to leave the homes, to show, to find some bravery in themselves, to stand in the queues at the border, to enter fearlessly in the new environment, to keep the children, maintain the children, and and maintain the husbands that had stayed in Ukraine. So part of them have returned to Ukraine, part of them have stayed in Poland, and each of them, has a strength in themselves. Ukrainian women have a lot of resources that help them, that enable them to help everyone to keep going. I mean, to maintain their families, to fight on the front line and so on.
Teraz do Agnieszki. Agnieszka, ty od początku jeździłaś też.
So, Agnieszka, you have been going to Ukraine, but also, Ukrainian women staying in Poland. More victims, more of heroines, or something in between?
O czym mówiła?
I would actually, follow the Tatyana Herasimova's the way of thinking. A victim, is.
Powodów.
The first association is like, treating a woman like an object. So let's leave it. Perhaps, the injured. The ones, or the harmed ones, is perhaps the best definition. I mean, the women fleeing Ukraine because of the war is something, natural. I mean, perhaps there is some debate to be held, but perhaps it's not the best moment now for that. But millions of women, carers, to underline. Fleeing the Ukraine. Perhaps it's an error in perception to look at them as the carers only, or the injured only, and that's for two reasons. First of all, we simply skip all these women that have stayed there as nurses, as volunteers, as Tatyana mentioned, fulfilling the key roles in the society, purely gender roles, like preparing meals, or perhaps entering in kind of masculine roles as well. And what we are not aware is the number of military member soldiers being women, actually, in Ukraine. I mean, there is some clash, and we don't have the clear picture in Poland to cope with this image. A woman military service member and a woman as a mother and carer. So. What I have met with is that we shouldn't idealize rather stereotyping them as mothers and so on. We don't have the awareness of the changes that have taken place in Ukraine. I'm just observing that, so perhaps Tatyana could confirm. But the social, intercultural the effort that has happened after the Maidan back in 2014 has brought about a tremendous shift in perceptions. So, okay, women fleeing Ukraine play the role of carers, so that's one thing. But also, given the shift, this is a full appreciation of the roles that traditionally we would see as feminine or attributed to the women. Of course, I believe the armed forces of the Ukraine, I must admit, is the key point. I mean, is the most important part of the Ukrainian society now. But it's a war for the entire society. So a majority of the society contributes to the war effort. There wouldn't be any successes of the Ukrainian army if not only for the backup given by the women who cook, who care for children, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that the role traditionally attributed to women prevented us from recognizing the kind of the political social strength that women in Ukraine have. And my impression is that in Ukraine, it's recognized even more than in Poland. So the war is not only about weapons, about the male soldiers and so on. The title of this the discussion is a provocation itself. But the dichotomy is just an illusion. There's a variety of roles that women fulfill. There are key roles, both at home and on the front lines as soldiers, but also as medical rescuers, medics, nurses, and so on. These are also backed by all the women activists, the social members of NGOs and social workers. So this situation has been simply worked out thoroughly. So women are simply autonomous at this war. Thank you very much. Now, from the academic perspective, what's your point? What are your thoughts? Thank you for inviting me. This is an honor to be with you here. And let me tell you something more about metadata or data sets that we get, not only from February, but from the beginning of the war, that is 2014, actually. I would agree with Agnieszka. That is, first wave of the migration or economic migration, as we call it in Poland. These were, women fleeing conflict areas, and in public debate now, we tend to speak only about the last 6 months. But this is the period over which these things have happened is much longer. So I would like to see the problem as from the perspective of multi-identities, and I have just given some, labels like migrants, internal and external, victims of the violence, be aware, activists. And I'm thinking that all these identities can be combined within a single person, and it's the only way we can perceive the Ukrainian women now. There are a variety of roles that they fulfill. Their roles may shift depending on the current developments, and I would like to encourage you to discuss what's the actual the situation of internally displaced women and Ukrainian refugees, women refugees in Poland. And the perceptions that we have, in Poland to their roles. So briefly speaking, we need to remember that, as Agnieszka said, the violence, armed conflict, the war affect all of us, whether women or men. But we need to remember that women and girls are affected, by the conflict differently. They experience the conflict differently and violence differently. So, there has been violence all the time, attacks, assaults, sexual violence against women, raising, 2 or 3-fold. It's just tactics of warfare, and it has been traditionally used in wars. And we have reports of such terrible events from that war. Now we've got reports from social workers. Let's remember what was the situation of women in Ukraine before the war, and how it deteriorated, how it has been exacerbated. Access to food, to water, basic things. So, there are still different layers of the problems that the women and girls in Ukraine need to face. If you have a look at, post-war, any war, statistics, death rates among women and girls, as quoted by the UN agendas, are much higher than before the war. So, of course, they are active. They support their husbands. They support the army. They support the country in the fight, in the struggle against the enemy. But also, what's important today is that women become an active driver of change. They begin to participate in debates, to prevent future contacts. They, are part of activities to build peace and rebuild the country. Again, they are present on all the front lines in this war. But it's not enough. When you look at the statistics, given by parliamentary assemblies, or also, women are mostly excluded from the formal decision-making processes, concerning, the aid and initiatives, conflict prevention, social works, and so on. Of course, all the burdens on women have grown, and the UN studies show that, the unpaid work, both for internally displaced and the refugees, is much more common after the February this year, and unfortunately, this actually contributed to precarization of work, the lowered status of women, despite high professional qualifications. This is also confirmed by our reports. Even if well-qualified Ukrainian refugees take on the unqualified jobs, so this is a forced shift with huge consequences for their professional lives, for the biographies, for personal developments, for the skilling ambitions. They are devoid of support. They don't have the husbands at their sides, so they can't attend university courses. If we don't take care of these things, it will be a lost generation of the women. They will be knocked back to the lowest level of the professional ladder. In the recent debates, there have been voices that, despite all of this, that women refugees need to face, the challenges of the providers for the family, not only for children but for husbands, as said before. And they need to face, the difficulties on the housing market in Poland, job market in Poland, and so on. So the solution would be to reunify the families. My question would be: what if it proves impossible to reunite families? The husband has died, has been killed in the war. They have been divorced. And so on. The pandemic also has had an impact. Death rates, since 2020, are really dramatic. So now there's military escalation of the conflict. So over the last 6 months, according to the Ukrainian ministerial data, the death rates among lone women or single women has grown twofold. Either fled alone or with only children, abroad, or their husbands killed. So the burdens are due to grow on them, despite the fact that they have suffered a lot so far. So just to wrap up, I would also oppose this pejorative aspect of the word victim. Unfortunately, the reality is that in global politics, women have become victims of violence of the war.
Thanks for this first round of statements. As Iwona said, we have discussed long about the title of this panel, especially the word victim was kind of debatable. We also tried to avoid this word because it raises very bad associations. But again, it's not what we think about it. We just wanted to convey the spirit of certain discourse that is going on. So this is something to reflect on, and for us, we are not directly affected by the war, but again, maybe it should be a stimulus to think about nations, communities, women who are suffering at the moment. You spoke about the price that Ukrainian women are paying for this war experience, and recently a debate held by Batory Foundation. Actually, it was a series of debates about the war in Ukraine, going back even to 2014. In one of the debates, the director of Sociology Institution from the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences said that according to their research, women were displaying higher level of stress than men who are directly involved in combat. So it shows really where we are, where those women are, what their situation really is.
Jak wspierać?
So now my question is
To jest,
how to help, how to support.
to może być naszą rolą.
Because
Dużo się
I believe this is our role.
pomagamy, dużo
We hear Poles are helping a lot. We have already helped a lot. And this is, in fact, a long-term job. But
doświadczają.
speaking from your experience,
Sensowne wsparcie
what do we mean by reasonable, targeted help, assistance? What this might be like?
Nie słychać, Tatiana.
Так. Отже, як ми вже з'ясували, українські жінки не є жертвами.
Well, as we have just discussed, Ukrainian women are not victims. We don't want to call them this way. On the other hand, we need assistance. We need support.
Тут у Польщі,
When we talk about women who
то
are in Poland or elsewhere in European countries,
необхідно
the first
з цих жінок жертв не робити з них
first thing is not to consider them victims of war,
їх власну здатність.
do not consider them
У цих
some kind
жінках,
of
незважаючи
inferior or less valuable or unable to take care of themselves, because these women, Ukrainian refugees, they are
це
in a bad situation. So the best thing we can do to help them rediscover
як це можна
their own assets, their own resources, their own strength,
дати можливість цим
so
жінкам
that they feel they're back on the legs. So maybe empower them to make decisions about themselves, about their children, about their lives.
Незважаючи на те, що це була дуже потрібна і це була
Although that was
ситуація була дуже
that has been a very needed assistance throughout recent months, but I know in some places women were not able to decide anything.
вона не могла
They were just passively receiving food, clothes, so they were not able to decide what they wanted to eat or what shampoo they wanted to use
себе.
for their hair. So if you can't make such simple decisions, you feel that you are losing control of your own life.
В інших місцях жінка
You're losing power to decide.
деякі
So in some locations, women had
кухня,
greater room to decide on their own. They were just
саме
perhaps guided or asked for advice what they would like to eat or cook or what they need
набагато
to go on.
було видно. Вони
And such women were in a better emotional shape because they felt more
вони створили дійсно якусь спільну.
independent. They were able to establish better relations.
Більш спроможні. І вони були готові стикатися з якимись майбутніми викликами. Коли ми
They felt certain agency and were bolder in facing challenges.
подумаємо потім, тобто вони відчували в собі цю силу.
And even if facing the problem of refusal to stay somewhere for longer, they were ready to go on, to keep going. So every woman may need a different thing. So, for example,
Можливо,
what do the women, Ukrainian women already in Poland need? Maybe they need work. They need
яка не відповідає їхній кваліфікації. І, наприклад,
They can take up employment that other people don't want to do.
йде про
Or maybe they have some other resources to rely on,
плати, не
and they don't need to be told what to do. They should be free to decide whether they can go back home or stay in Poland, whether send children to Polish school or keep them at home to work, to learn remotely. So
на мій погляд, це так.
if you have such resources and you can take decisions on the daily basis, this makes you stronger and independent.
Chciałbyś się podzielić swoimi obserwacjami, może też już konkretnymi pomysłami.
Well, Agnieszka, what is your idea? Maybe you have some solutions or recipes.
I rozumienie.
Well, I believe Tatyana is really experienced, and what she said is really true and even universal. It's a universal rule how to support people, how to support women.
Się mówi o pomocy,
I worked many years on
wątków,
self-development and cooperation.
czego on potrzebuje.
And I know that women would often be told what the man needs, how to satisfy men's needs, that they are in the center. So, on the one hand, these are certain universal mechanisms. And, of course, generally speaking, we should support Ukrainians in all possible ways. But what is important for me, and we seem to ignore it, in recent months we have seen certain relationships getting stronger because national states tend to say, our government tends to say, Ukraine did something for Poland. But if you remember, the early hours of the war, so people from NGOs, people dealing with, for example, animals or feminist organizations, they establish contacts with other feminist or animal or other organizations in Ukraine because they were able to help them more effectively. And the Ukrainian women I spoke with, they were really moved that in the first boxes, parcels of humanitarian aid delivered to Ukraine, there were, for example, hygienic articles. So they thought, well, we are being understood. They understand our needs. So, going back to what we said in the first part, the experience of sexual abuse, I think a lot has changed in the world in this area. This is not a question of individual violence, but more of a social problem. And I believe Ukrainian women suffering from sexual abuse, but also active.
Prokuratorka generalna, że aktywna jest żona prezydenta.
And we know the first lady of Ukraine, how active she is in this area.
Straszna rzecz, ale też ani nie.
Of course, this is awful, but it should not be a taboo just because it's awful. It's part of the war. We have to face it. We have to understand it.
Czy przynieść sprawiedliwość, a przede wszystkim.
And do justice and support those who have gone through this. So these are some universal mechanisms, but the fact that there are active women on both sides of the border, and they do have influence, and they will also take part in peace negotiations. They will watch all these necessary conditions to be met. Well, so we have managed to add something else. Well, you're talking about certain systemic effects
powiedziała z twojego doświadczenia?
Well, what about your experience? How to help so that it makes sense? Well, I'd like to reverse this problem from the individual to institutional level. At the level of institutions, we sometimes seem to ignore things. I'm not that optimistic whether Ukrainian women will be able to emancipate, whether they will have political representation in this peacemaking process that we would like to see coming fast. So there are no guarantees. I know I have experience from the United States, from the Great Britain, but we don't have any guarantees that Ukrainians united today will be equally united after they have fought for peace. And maybe that's the best moment for the final appeal. I think Ukraine and Europe in general, in their approach to humanitarian aid, which is really extraordinary, they need to keep in mind the aspect of gender and also other factors that come into play. Because these women, they're not only Ukrainian citizens, but in fact, there are 130 representatives of ethnic groups, of language groups. Among them, we have Ukrainian citizens who will need support as well. This assistance and the expected collapse of the Ukrainian economy, this help will be sizable. It goes into hundreds of millions of euro. And indeed, we have to really keep our fingers on the pulse in order not to lose, in this humanitarian aid, not to lose Ukrainian women and girls from sight, because in a moment when we start together rebuilding Ukraine after the war, we have to keep it in mind. And a few slogans that we think are quite obvious, that we do have to support humanitarian aid that will be gender sensitive. And as Agnieszka put it, we have to listen to organizations, women organizations from Ukraine who are in combat, who know what the needs are. We have to listen to Ukrainians, not only in Ukraine, but also in the world. And we have to monitor the needs. This is key to make this help as effective as possible and really tailored to this dynamic situation of war and hopefully soon peace. So we have to also support the establishment of safe humanitarian corridors. Now it's much better than previously. We saw Russia didn't respecting this, and they should really suffer the consequences for ignoring that humanitarian standards, safe passage, for example. So there must be tools, mechanisms in place to monitor the fundamental rights of Ukrainian women, not only in conflict, not only in social terms, but also after the conflict. So stop the fact that the perpetrators go unpunished. We have to keep in mind that all the violence, rapes, the perpetrators should be held to account as war criminals, because it's us, it's Europe that should really drive this process. It's all about protecting Ukrainian women and children. So on the one hand, we all know it. On the other, we seem to turn a blind eye as institutions to also human trafficking affecting women. and
Nie ma realny
there are no
rynek, przepraszam,
actual measures to counteract this. Look at Germany.
konsultacyjne w języku.
There is even a recruitment company in Germany inviting Ukrainian women to, inverted commas, interviews. They were invited to interviews in spring.
Do jakby konsultacji na temat wsparcia dla osób świadczących.
They wanted these women to be consulted on a possible acceptance of provision of sexual services in Germany. And you see, it went unpunished. There are no legal consequences. Such entities work legally, but the only answer we have is not to protect passages, railway station, etc. Women should be protected also on the labor market. We have to read the data of the World Bank that the market of working women is shrinking. The World Bank says the Ukrainian economy is going to shrink by up to 35%, and women are at risk in the first place because there is still a problem of gender imbalance on the labor market. And many women, by the way, in Poland, although qualified, although competent, they cannot make it to the labor market because of the language barrier. And women also should be included in peace negotiations in the future. But this should not only be a slogan. Women, female organizations should be invited to peaceful talks, not only in public, but also political talks, to enable specific protection, specific safeguards to stop human trafficking today, because this is the greatest threat, in my opinion. And let me stress this aspect, because looking to surveys, research so far, up to 2022, Ukrainian women would mostly make it, speaking about human trafficking, would mostly make it to Russia, to countries east of Ukraine. Today, we have this problem at home, here in Poland. And there's no public debate on solutions to stop it.
Bardzo dziękuję. Ja się tego obawiałam właśnie. Mamy temat, mamy mało czasu.
Thank you. I was just about to stop you. I mean, it may be an endless discussion. I believe there are so many matters to touch on. As it's a huge topic. It takes the debate. A number of questions have been unanswered. A number of issues that the public debate is silent on, and so on. But okay, I'll ask the third question, but you can only answer in 2 sentences. As a punishment, of course I'm joking, but I need to ask this question. So maximum 2 or 3 sentences. How are Ukrainian women going to cope with that, or go out as who from the war? What will be the consequences for this social group? Tatyana, so please be the first to answer.
Звичайно, всі ці події точно будуть мати ще довгострокові.
In fact, all the events, all the developments will have long-term consequences. Will go out, different people out of this situation. I must say that a lot of people, a lot of the women will suffer from trauma, deep trauma. Still, all these consequences can be, I hope,
тому що це не
can be only tracked down over years, and they will have to be addressed somehow. On the other hand, because at this moment and over the last 8 years, from the beginning of the war, the role of women in social life has been more and more important. Women, more and more women get into politics, have the political representations in the communities, in the professional organizations, in the feminist organizations, and so on. And this process cannot be stopped now. Ukraine, will not be rebuilt without women. I'm quite certain that women will take an active part in this process, and I agree with my colleagues in that Ukrainian feminist organizations and women's organizations, international organizations as well, will have a great role in the process. Just like the organization I work at, helping women in Poland, our organization is Voice Amplified.
І ми маємо на увазі підсилення голосу жінок і дівчат.
That is, I'm quite sure that will be louder and louder and will be heard, on the broader scale, ever broader.
Czytałam raport bardzo ważny.
Thank you very much, Tatyana. Was a co-author of the publication prepared by the Women Amplified.
Przepraszam.
Nie, no. To, co mogę...
Right, what can I add?
Ona jest...
The war is so complex and so traumatic an event that it changes everything. There are a multitude of factors that will play a role. Now there's migration. That is, how many people decide to return to Ukraine will be of importance. Also, the traumas, the experience of violence will be a challenge. Is a challenge and will be one. But on the other hand, it's with great hope and interest that I look at Ukraine just now, because my feeling is that in Western Europe, in Poland, we live without kind of in a sense of helplessness, with a feeling of senselessness and powerlessness. Okay, there are some developments, but I believe I see that Ukrainians and Ukrainian women have the sense of agency, of empowerment. And this is very optimistic. This Alexeyevich's the story that there's a kind of a backlash after the war. But without going to idealize this violence in the army itself, for instance. But the work will go on, as Tatyana said, and the fight will go on. And I will, rely on cooperation, refer to cooperation, just like the Ukrainians have understood better and better that it's good to cooperate. It's an important conclusion for the benefit of international cooperation. I learn a lot now. I understand various processes better and better. So benefits are for both sides. We'll learn a lot about each other, as women, as societies, as nations. So, the fight will go on. This is the basic principle I will stick to. Now, Magdalena Lachowicz, just 1 minute for you to wrap up. I'm sure that
opowieści o
We will not return to to a narrative on instrumentalized women, and it's really important what my colleagues have said. We have learned how to enter into social dialogue. I'm quite sure that the dialogue will continue. There are no barriers to it. It's only about the idea for the tool. So I'm optimist in this regard. I'm also aware that Ukraine will face huge challenges after the war. Not only to rebuild the country, the economy, the society. All of these overlapping and continuing from before the war. So these problems will be huge, and I am pessimistic about the ability of Ukrainian women to resolve them. It's a huge the challenge. Tatyana, you mentioned the unregistered. The internally displaced people. So the problems that we will face are terrible. This includes poverty, for instance. Given the European reference levels, it was very high. It was structural. Provincial areas, peripheries, disprivileged regions, and so on. This is where women suffer from physical violence, sexual violence, economic violence, and so on. So a lot of work to do. So in a situation of prolonged war, whatever we say today, the prolonged war will not be conducive to resolving those problems. So I plan to be optimistic, but if you have a look at statistics, if only for the poverty, then 70% of Ukrainian citizens, fall into this category, and traditionally, quality of life, or just kind of psychologically motivated rejection of inequalities, social inequalities in Ukraine. The self-perceptions of women in Ukraine. Also, the spread of the poverty among professionally active people. This is the problem of the labor market structure. All these are challenges that we'll need to face, regardless of the size of the aid programs, that will be difficult to resolve. And there's Ukrainian women, Ukrainian the men, Ukrainian government will actually need to do the homework, put a lot of work into utilizing the aid, whatever it will be, in the proper way. And unfortunately, the ultimate structural, infrastructural, and the consequences of the war are still unknown. This is terrifying, really. I wouldn't venture into describing these. All right, two academic sentences, I would say. But okay, thank you very much for your input. I would like to thank the interpreters, and thank you, Natalia, for having invited us and keeping an eye on us in the preparation of this discussion. I hope that we have only started this discussion, and that will be continued, among us in our channels. It will be going deeper and deeper, and for next year's edition, we'll prepare a discussion for more than 1 hour, definitely. Thank you very much for your attention, everyone.
Ja bardzo dziękuję wszystkim ekspertkom, które...
Thank you very much to all the experts, speakers in the discussion. I've always been an optimist. I work for 8 programs, and I know that there are various organizations in Ukraine doing a lot of work for the benefit of youth and women in Ukraine. Even if at the beginning, after the outbreak of the war, Ukrainian women were victims, they ceased to be victims and are the heroines, and will continue to be so. So they will be the victors in Ukraine. Slava Ukraini, and Geroyam Slava.